What if the test you trusted with your embryos, the one meant to help you grow your family, was never properly validated? PGT-A embryo testing is often marketed as a smart, science backed way to increase your chances of a healthy baby and avoid miscarriage. But what if the reality is far more complicated and far more troubling? Today on Surrogacy Made Simple, I'm joined by fertility attorney Allison Freeman, who's asking bold questions about the science and ethics behind PGT-A. And she's not just raising concerns, she's actually suing testing companies over what she believes are serious flaws in how these tests are used and sold. Together, we explore how this common embryo screening tool may be doing more harm than good and what you need to know before making major fertility decisions. I'll be honest, there are questions I couldn't ask Allison because of her pending litigation. And also keep in mind, this episode reflects just one perspective. I don't necessarily agree with every statement you're going to hear, but this conversation still deserves your attention and, of course, your critical thinking. Whether you're an intended parent, a surrogate, or just IVF curious, this is a conversation you didn't know you needed to hear. You're listening to Surrogacy Made Simple with Dr. Alyssa Small-Lane, your host. Thank you so much for joining us on Surrogacy Made Simple. I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself.
My name is Allison Freeman, but everyone calls me Allie. I am a proud member of the fertility community. I had my daughter due to IVF, and also a practicing attorney. And I have been now practicing in the fertility field slash IVF field for the last couple of years, helping patients through all kinds of things, document requests, understanding HIPAA, whether they are owed certain documents, helping them navigate kind of any issues that might come up during their fertility treatments, things that they're concerned about, whether something was potentially an issue that needs to be a legal issue, or if it's just something that I maybe want to send a letter or help them understand, especially all the contracts and documents you get through fertility treatments. I do a lot of helping explain those documents to patients.
Can you share a little bit about your fertility journey, at least what you feel
Yeah.
comfortable with sharing with the world?
Of course. When my husband and I got married, I was not the person who was 100% sure I wanted children. I always knew I wanted to be a lawyer, but I wasn't sure how I was going to do both. It was just one of those things. Wanted to be a lawyer since I was in kindergarten. It never changed. But now that I am starting to think about that, can I be a mom? I was working crazy hours and had lots of billables. I secretly always thought I might have trouble getting pregnant. I'd had ovarian cysts that for years had put me in the hospital. So I just knew, okay, I have an issue. I have ovulatory problems. I thought it might be a struggle, but I just think you don't really know until you know, right? So then we figured, okay, let's give this a shot. And then, yeah, we started trying and I realized, okay, I have no idea when I need to be trying because I'm just not regular. I went to a doctor and started pushing for things. They started testing and said, you have an ovulatory issue, you have PCOS. We went to a specialist and started that process, did all the medications, and then 6 IUIs. None of them were successful. And then I moved to IVF after that, did 2 rounds of IVF, and that gave me my daughter, who is now 5. When I went back to begin IVF again, I started the testing, had my medications at the pharmacy ready to pick up, and found out I was pregnant. Just didn't feel good, took a test and was pregnant. So, kind of shocked because they had told me I'd never get pregnant on my own. And at that point, I was considered an age that they had said definitely I wouldn't get pregnant on my own. But I did. So, yeah, she is now 3. So, those are my 2 daughters.
Two very different ways of becoming a mom.
Right. Yes, it's crazy. Yeah, so with my daughter who's 5, they actually put in 2 embryos. At that point, they did do 2 embryos and I actually had both take. And then I lost her twin at 12 weeks and then had her. So then I got pregnant naturally. After I'd had her, they said, "Oh, I think you should go on birth control." And I said, "I didn't get pregnant very easily. I'm just going to see what happens." And I did end up getting pregnant one time and I lost that baby at 12 weeks also. So then I had to push for more testing because I was like, look, I have trouble keeping these pregnancies also. So what's happening there? So I pushed for that. And so that's why when I got pregnant again, when I was doing the testing, luckily my doctor and I were super close at that point, and he had already called in medications for me. So I was able to start a protocol for maintaining that pregnancy that worked. I did need assistance. It was just a matter of us trying to figure that out for me on that next round. But yeah, so very, very different. So you just never know. Family building is a crazy journey, no matter what way it happens. So,
That's very true. Family building is a crazy journey
right, it's different
for
for
so
everybody,
many of
for sure.
us.
I tell people all the time, it will be different for you, it'll be different for your siblings. Even my sister was so interested in what I was doing because she's my sister, and I was like, "Even though we're related, it's gonna be so different for you than for me. It's never the same for anybody." When I went through fertility, I did not tell anybody. I was very secret about it. I wish I had not been, to be honest. When I went to go back to do it again, I had been vocal at that point, had made a group online that I was friends with, and it was so much easier to talk to people about it. I know that's not for everybody, but I almost think having people who are in it but are not your family or your friends is actually easier because they understand it, but they aren't emotionally invested, if that means they want the best for you, but they don't. I didn't have my parents or close friends who were all saying, "Oh, we wanna have kids around the same time," and it was like, "Oh my gosh, this is so much pressure." Yeah, but that first time with my daughter, we didn't tell anybody. We honestly, we told them we were pregnant, and then we said, "Oh, and by the way, this was through in vitro fertilization," and they had 8,000 questions.
Managed to keep it to yourself with all the visits and ultrasounds and testing.
Yeah, it was crazy, I will say. So, I think because I felt like it was controlling so much of my life, I wanted to act like the rest of my life was totally normal, even though it wasn't. I remember I wasn't really drinking because of everything. People would be like, "Oh, are you pregnant?" And it would just break my heart every time, right? Because I was trying so hard to get pregnant and I would just think, "No, I'm not." And I didn't want to tell people why I wasn't drinking. But yeah, that part was hard. I remember taking phone calls from my car outside my office of how many eggs I'd had retrieved, how many were fertilized, how many blastocysts we got, and just being crushed and then having to put it together and go in and work. And it was just not normal in any context at all. And even the IUIs, I would have my husband's specimen under my desk. And I would be working normally. People would come in my office and ask me questions. I'm like, yeah, thinking, this is so not normal. I have like stuff in a lunchbox under my desk, but this is my new reality and this is my life. What in what world is this normal? It just became, I don't know. I felt like I was playing two people, one person, and I didn't want anyone to know why I was emotional or why I was upset or just wanted to seem normal, I guess. And then I was a totally different person otherwise. I was so regimented, following a calendar, doing injections, even all the funny places you do injections, acting
Yes.
normal. And then I'd walk out of a deposition, give myself a shot, go back in, finish the deposition. I just didn't really tell anyone. I did end up telling my law partner. Um, Once I started, I was gone so much. I just didn't want him to think that I was getting ready to leave. When I went in and told him I needed to talk to him, he thought I was leaving. Like he just
Oh,
because
like
I
she's doing interviews, she's looking at other firms.
he goes, "I thought you were interviewing and something because you've been really, you go to your car and then you come in with your phone only." And I thought, "Oh my gosh, this is horrible." It was definitely hard to keep it a secret. I so badly wanted to act normal, even though nothing was normal. I don't know why that was what I did, but that's what I did. I saw a therapist the whole time, and she would constantly say to me, "Do you think you want someone in your corner?" That's just how I chose to deal with it. Everyone deals with it so differently. And like I said, I wouldn't recommend keeping it so private to just him and I. I wish I would have had a couple people, but that's just what I needed in my headspace at that time.
Everybody's different. Some people share with the entire world, have entire
Right.
social media accounts set up around their fertility journeys, and other people really keep it close, either their close knit community or just a couple people or just their partner.
I think I've heard so much about ghost accounts on Instagram. Make an account, but it's not you, just to be part of that.
Community.
Yes, I wish I would have done that. If I could go back and redo it, I would have done that. So at least I would have had that little community. So,
How did your personal experience going through fertility issues and change your career? Or were you
I
already practicing in the area of fertility law at that time?
no. So I work in property insurance. I've done that almost my entire career. I've sued insurance companies for homeowners and business owners when they're underpaid for any property claims. For example, I live in Florida, so a lot of hurricane claims. I've always gone after big business, trying to fight for everyday people who are just saying, "Look, I need a new roof," or "I've been underpaid for this." So it wasn't that strange of a transition. What happened to me is I went through fertility treatments myself. I had things happen throughout my treatments that I just thought, this does not seem right. For example, I said I did 6 IUIs. My doctor on the 6 IUI said to me, "What were the results of your HSG test?" And I said, "What do you mean? What's that?" And he goes, "Oh, honey, you would know what an HSG test is." I said, "I don't think I did that." He goes, "Oh." okay, well, hopefully this works, and did the thing, and I went home. On the way home, I called my best friend who had done IVF. She was like, "You didn't do an HSG test?" I said, "No." She goes, "Oh my gosh, I cannot believe that you've done 6 IUIs and you have not done that." And then I asked someone else and they're like, "No, that is not good." So I left that
What's an
practice.
HSG test for people that are
Yes.
listening?
With the HSG test, they inject dye to make sure your uterus is the right shape and that your fallopian tubes are open. If your fallopian tubes are not open and your uterus is not the right shape, you can't get pregnant with an IUI. The egg will not drop. The sperm will be inserted. They can't find each
Yeah,
other.
the
They
sperm and
come
the egg have
again.
nowhere to meet.
Yes.
So
They
the
don't.
sperm's in your uterus and the egg is in the ovary or
Right.
maybe floating in your
Yes.
peritoneum in your pelvis, but they don't meet.
I was so frustrated. I went to a new clinic, had issues there. Then I went to another clinic that said, "Okay, I think it's time for IVF for you." I had talked to them about the IUI thing, and she said to me, "Do you want to do the HSG test? You can get pregnant with IVF without it, but if you find out your tubes are closed, like, how upset are you going to be about what you've just been through?" And I said, "Honestly, mentally, I can't go back there because I feel like I've done it 6 times. I feel like we're moving to IVF at this point. So yeah, let's just do it." That happened to me. And then once you've been through fertility treatments, people send people to you. It's like friends will talk to you, family. I was super quiet about it, but once I was on the other side, I did start posting. I journaled and I would post my journal to this blog. I'd post them on social media, just my thoughts about my treatments and things I wish I would have known. Like, I should have asked questions. I wish I would have asked my friend beforehand and said, "What are the things you're supposed to do?" Because I kept it all to myself. I didn't call her until I was fully done with 6 IUIs and then said to her, "What's HSG?" And she said, "You've never heard of it?" And so then I thought, "Oh my gosh, I don't know anything. I wish I would have asked more questions." So I started doing research on it and I shared all that stuff in my blog and people would reach out and strangers of strangers, I would get a call that, "Hey, can I give your name to this person?" And so I would talk to people and I kept getting questions. "Hey, my lab did this," or "My doctor wants me to do this," or "I was given these documents that say they're going to discard all my embryos. What should I do?" So I would tell people my thoughts IVF wise. And then people kept saying, "Aren't you a lawyer? What do you think as a lawyer?" And I thought, oh, let me think of it from a lawyer standpoint. And I started noticing how many people needed that assistance. They would say, "Oh, I want to move my embryos to a new clinic," and the community, and they would say, "Oh, you can't move your embryos." And I thought, "Oh, well, that doesn't sound right." So then I would tell people, "Just send me your contract. Let me look at it." So I'd take a look at their contract. I'm like, right here, it literally says, "These are your embryos," which is what case law says. Let me write a letter. So then I would write an email, and all of a sudden the clinic would be, "Oh, okay, yeah, you can move your embryos. Oh, sorry for the confusion." And I was like, okay, so then the next one would happen and it was, "Hey, they won't send me my records. They're saying they're not part of HIPAA." And I'm like, "Well, that's not right." Send me this. I'll write it later. So that's how it just organically happened. And I loved it. Like I loved being able to say, "Okay, let me use what I learned, the mistakes I made, and push for other people." And so it just spiraled from there. A couple years ago, I called my partner and said, "Hey, I think I want to start doing this more as part of my practice. I love property. We're doing great in property, but this is what I love." I feel like there was a reason that I went through what I went through, and I happen to be a lawyer, and there's not a lot of people who can say that. There's great people out there in this area of law, but I've talked to some of them and they've not been through it personally. So I was like, I can understand the terminology. I can understand the emotional side of it. For example, there's things you shouldn't say to people who've been through treatment, which I think is a very hard thing. So I just started doing it a couple of years ago and it's just taken off from there. I love it. I love being able to help people with it and look at it with a new set of eyes. I'm passionate about fertility treatments, super passionate about IVF and protecting it. I think it needs to be available for everybody for family building. But the sad
Yes.
but the sad honest truth is that things happen. It's not always perfect, especially with no insurance involved. Like for someone who sues insurance companies, it's crazy when most people don't have insurance, there's not a lot of checks and balances. So there's things that really do need another set of eyes or they shouldn't be happening. And I think that's where patients get lost a lot and don't feel like
Mhm.
they're heard, which is hard, or they're afraid to be heard. I've heard that so much. I'm afraid to ask. I'm afraid to advocate for myself because if I say I don't wanna do this or, "Hey, I wanna do this instead," what if they tell me go somewhere else? And I think that's a huge fear.
And it can happen.
100% because they don't have to treat you. That's absolutely true, but there's a difference between advocating for yourself and if you don't ask the question, will it bug you for the rest of time, right? You wonder, if I just said, "Hey, can I change my protocol in some way?" My second round, They did not plan on changing anything from my first round, and I didn't get pregnant my first round. And I said, "I have to change something. I can't do the same thing. I just wanna change one thing." And I pushed, and they're like, "Yeah, let's change. Let's add more testosterone. Let's add more progesterone at the end." There's other things they changed, and I got pregnant. And I'll never know if the additional progesterone was why I got pregnant. I won't know if the additional I think it was estrogen in the beginning. I won't know, but
But if
I
it
felt
didn't
like
work, then you would
it
forever be wondering,
Oh,
maybe
100%.
I should have
Right,
pushed.
right.
It could have been different.
And that's why I feel like when people say, "Oh, I asked about this supplement," or "I wanna do acupuncture," my doctor was like, "Oh, you don't need it," or if that makes you feel I don't think acupuncture is gonna hurt anything. I think that's so crazy when people are like, "My doctor said" you know what? I get that, but I also think if it's gonna make you in a better headspace and maybe that's what you need, will you ever regret having
Maybe
done
worth
it?
it.
And I think that's where I feel this area is very regimented. It's okay, you're this, you can't get pregnant, we wanna get you pregnant. It's very run people through the protocols, not a lot of individualized sometimes. People feel like they have to follow the same thing that everybody else does when that doesn't work for them. Then they get frustrated and they don't know what to do or where to ask. Yeah, I don't know if that totally answers your question, but that's okay.
And
But
you
yeah,
touched
so
on some things that we definitely want to highlight next.
mhm,
So you mentioned IVF add-ons. One of those is PGT-A testing.
yep.
And I don't know if that was around at the time when you were first doing your
Mhm,
IVF, but you know a lot about PGT-A testing now,
yes.
as well as some concerns
Yep.
about it. So, when did you first learn about PGT-A as well as concerns surrounding this technology?
So when I first started IVF back in 2018, I was under 35 and PGTA was brought up, but it was very much oh, we have this test if you wanted to do it, but you don't have to, and just brushed over very quickly. I recommended a fresh transfer. So they decided we weren't going to do PGTA. Then, when the fresh transfer didn't take, they said, okay, we can thaw your embryos, biopsy them, and test them. And I thought, that sounds like a lot on an embryo. I'm going to let's just do it. So we ended up not PGTA, but just transfer them. So we transferred them. And then I had my daughter. When I went back for treatments in 2021, it was so different. Hey, you're over 35. There's this test. You need to do it. I thought, oh, I remember this test. It was brought up to me, but wow. So now I need to do it. Why? They said you have a higher chance of an abnormal embryo because of your age. I wasn't sure. And I wanted to do more research because that's what I like to do when I don't know about something and I feel like I'm being sold something. I am the type of, if you want me to do something, I don't know if I want to do it. I felt very pushed. And because even when I wasn't sure, first my doctor, then a webinar I had to watch, then this woman spoke with me even when I wasn't sure about it. It felt very much, you have to do this. You shouldn't do IVF without it. And I thought, well, I did IVF without it a couple years ago. I know I'm older, but you said my follicles look great. My mock transfer went great. So I just said, I don't know. And then I got pregnant and didn't end up having to do it. Then I started having friends, people who'd reach out and talk to me about, I got this many eggs and this many fertilized. Now I'm here. Now I'm here. I had one call me and say, I have one embryo. And I was like, honey, it only takes one. Like it just
Mm.
takes one. You can do this. And then she called me, I think it was 10 days later. Oh, I have zero. And I said, what do you mean? I said, oh my gosh, did it not take? And she said, no, I never got to transfer it. And then I was like, wait a minute. And she had difficulty getting pregnant. And I thought, what do you mean you had one and now you have zero? This is nuts. So then she went through it again. Same thing, went from having had 3 to 0. And then I had another friend who was over 40, she had 4, then 0. And I was like, "Where are these embryos going? This is crazy. We're all so excited you have embryos, especially my friends over 40. You have all we were so excited that they had embryos." And then all of a sudden it was like, "You have 0. Well, you can't transfer any of these." They were like, "I wanna transfer it. I wanna give it a try." And it was, "No, no, no, you can't." So anyways, I became obsessed with this test. I have the text message where I wrote my friend and I was like, "I don't get it. I don't understand how something can be this in medicine so amazing and so spot on and keeping people from transferring embryos. This has got to be just like the golden rule, right?" So I became very obsessed with it. I didn't sleep much at all. I would read every single research piece. I would read blogs. I joined all the groups because I was just trying to help my friends. I was like, I just don't know. Are they still on ice? Can we move them to a clinic that will transfer them? Like, I was just trying to help them figure out what to do with it. And yeah, it just became a downright obsession.
Backtrack
Yeah.
just a little bit.
Yeah.
So, T a testing.
Yeah.
That is done on embryos.
Yes.
Yes. What does that stand for?
Yeah. So PGT-A testing is preimplantation genetic testing for aneuploidy. So what's happening is you get your eggs, they fertilize them, and then they let them grow for 3 to 6, sometimes 7 days. During that time, they become blastocysts. So the cells they're dividing, they're becoming more. So they get to a point where they say, okay, we can take a biopsy and send it for PGT-A testing. So what they do is they do the biopsy. It's taken from the outer shell, which is called the trophectoderm. They take anywhere from 5 to 10 cells. It depends on how much goes into the pipette. It's very small. And then they take that biopsy from that embryo and then they ship that to a lab. And that lab runs that biopsy through a platform and they test it. And based on that, they get results. And so those results could be either that biopsy shows abnormal amount of chromosomes, a normal number of chromosomes, or mosaic, which is a mixture. And so based on that, then they give you results back saying the biopsy showed normal, abnormal, mosaic, depending on the lab. They all have different threshold percentages. So not all of them do it the same way, which is why it's very strange. Like you can ship an embryo to one lab and it could be considered mosaic or normal at another lab, even though it's the exact same sample. It's just the different platforms show different results based on what they've set for their thresholds. Yeah. And when they get that biopsy, they amplify it. So they take it, they put it through an amplification process. All these labs have different, can't remember what the word is that they call it, but they all have a proprietary thing to them that they utilize to make those results made. So they all do it a little bit differently. No one does it exactly the same. And then there's 2 different type of platforms that they use, either next generation sequencing or SNP array. So that's the platform that they put it through. And then they give you these results. And so then the results are given back to the patient in the clinic. And then based on those results, you make determinations about the embryos. And the thing that I always say is technically PGT-A gives you the results on the biopsy. It doesn't give you the results on the embryos. What they're saying is this is an embryo with an abnormal result. You know what I mean? So I always tell people say that versus the abnormal embryo because there's been a lot of research showing that perhaps these biopsies do not actually always show what the inner cell mass is because, like I said, they're from the trophectoderm. And because everyone does it differently, the results aren't always accurate. So the problem is we've been giving this test for, like I said, starting back, for years now. It's just increasing its usage. So it went from being in like 20% of cycles to now it's over 40% of cycles. And yeah, so more and more embryos are being tested. They're taking the biopsy and testing it and then giving these results back. And then based on these results, people make determinations. And I think what they're trying to do, patients in this infertility love information. Like we're huge proponents of information,
Yes.
all the information. Like, and I 100% am all for that too. I think the issue being some people just don't understand, like they don't understand what PGT-A can and can't do because of the way it's been marketed and sold to them, which is a lot of labs say it can increase your chances of having a healthy baby. It can decrease your chances of miscarriage. It gives you a higher chance of pregnancy. All these it increases the success of IVF. All wonderful things that people going through fertility want, right? Like that all sounds
Yes.
great. Sign me up. I'm all in. But what the research has shown that we've done is that they've not properly validated it to make sure that it does the things that they say it does. And so that's where we actually ended up filing class action lawsuits against some of these labs because the marketing doesn't match what the test can do. And so we want,
Right.
and really we want transparency. We want these patients to know what this test can and cannot do so they can decide how to utilize that information. If you've been told it can do all these things, increase your chance for a healthy baby, you're absolutely buying it and you're absolutely following everything that it says. But if that's not what it really does, you want that information. We want that to be told to them so that they can make those valid decisions and have all the information that they need to decide what to do with their embryos. And I think that's been our big component. And that's where the class actions are for is
Mhm.
sorry, the false and misleading advertising by the labs as to what the test can do. And they haven't actually validated that it can do what they say it does.
That's so
Sorry.
interesting. That's true because you get this test and then you make decisions. And you're talking about the trophectoderm and the inner cell mass, which is a lot more sciencey than what we usually talk about here on
Right.
Surrogacy
Sorry.
Made Simple. But to break it down, at least to my understanding, I'm not an REI, and it's been a while since I've rotated through REI. But the trophectoderm is the part of the embryo which is destined to become the placenta. And the inner cell mass is a part of the embryo which is destined to become the baby. So the
Right.
biopsy is done on the part which is going to be the placenta, not the baby, which in and of itself causes some issues because maybe the genetics is slightly different in terms of the fact that you can have a chromosome abnormality in the placenta, but not in a baby. But
100%.
when you're given these results, you're making a decision based off of those results. Even though you have that information in your head, even though you know that this is biopsy of basically placenta tissue, you still have to face an abnormal test. And even me as an OBGYN, I've had to face that too because we did PGT testing and we were presented with embryos that were abnormal or biopsy to be abnormal. And then you make decisions. And
Right.
if you have multiple embryos to make a decision from, then naturally you're going to think, I'm going to go with the ones that I'm told are normal, and the ones that aren't normal or are mosaics, then those would be last or maybe not at all. But
Right.
then you have people in your friend situation where if all of them or there only one is tested as abnormal or mosaic, then what do you do?
Yeah, and that's what's so hard for me because I agree that truly abnormal embryos are more likely to miscarry. They are to not lead to a healthy baby. That's accurate. But it's whether this test can show you that. And that's where the disconnect is. When the test is saying we can 98% accurately tell you whether or not this is an abnormal embryo, and they've never really validated whether they can 98% accurately tell you, that's a problem. That's where patients are being misled because they don't understand. Then they see that result and they're going, oh my gosh, there's no way I could transfer this. And we don't know if that's true. And then there's people who have taken that chance and have had healthy babies. And then, like you said, you look at those and you're like, well, I don't know what to do in my case because that sounds wonderful, but I also don't want to put myself through another miscarriage. And that's a really hard decision to make. But the truth is, I just want people to have all the information. By withholding,
Exactly.
what the test can and cannot do, that's a problem. Especially for people who are like, the hardest part about this is when you sign up for PGT-A, usually you're early in your journey. When I was offered PGT-A, I had no idea how many embryos I was going to end up with. If I had ended up with 12 embryos, woohoo, like that would have been amazing. I would have tested them, started probably with the what was considered a normal result and gone from there or whatever. But that's not everyone's reality. Like you said, you have one embryo, you're trying to make a very difficult decision. And that's where it's, well, I've been told it's 98% accurate. There's no way I'm transferring this, right? But then it's if it's not actually 98% accurate, you should know that and that you should know how accurate it is. And that's where our lawsuits are asking for it. We want it to be
Mhm.
truthful. You can't, it's how anything is really, right? If you're saying any of these things that are sold to individuals, you want the truth on it, right? And this is just as
Exactly.
important. You're making really important decisions about your embryos. You want to know you can trust the information you're being provided. And it's misleading that they're saying that it can do all these things that it can't do. And it's just that's what the lawsuits are about. That's what we're asking for.
Yes.
I think people are like, "Are you trying to get rid of it completely, or are you trying to get rid of IVF?" I'm like, "Absolutely not. I am a lover of IVF. I'm a, huge proponent of all this stuff. It's just a matter of giving patients the information and telling them the accuracy rate, right? Like, how accurate is it? And the miscarriage thing is huge too. Like I had 2 miscarriages. They're awful. Like I get that. People don't want to have more miscarriages. But if this test cannot do that, people should know that, right? Oh,
We've heard
100%.
that like most people do PGT in the beginning of their journey, but when people come to surrogacy as intended parents, there's often a lot of pressure which comes from agencies as well as surrogates. You have
Right.
surrogates that are asking to match with parents that have tested embryos because they
Mhm.
want to see this result to know that they are normal embryos to decrease the chance of miscarriage. But if all of that is based off of misleading information, then it can lead to some unnecessary situations.
And
Have
I think
intended parents that don't want to test or don't want to risk testing a
yeah.
fragile embryo and they may not match, or the test shows that it's a mosaic and most surrogates aren't comfortable having a
Mhm.
transfer of a mosaic. So it leads to other downstream issues.
I know with surrogacy, we've had a lot of patients have talked to us about how they were required to do PGT-A, but then it led to 0 embryos that they were permitted to transfer to that surrogate, so then they lost that surrogate, and they were like, "Okay, so I had to do PGT-A because my surrogate, felt more comfortable and whatever," and I understand that, but then now I have no embryos to transfer, so now I have no surrogate, and no I just lost my whole chance, like, and and then when they're finding out about, okay, maybe the test is not as accurate as we thought it was when we were sold this test, it breaks their hearts, and it's difficult conversations for me to have, try and tell them, "You did nothing wrong." When you're told something, you believe it. Especially one of the big things that a lot of these labs say is it shortens your time to having a baby, and when you're at
Who doesn't
surrogacy,
want
you're
that?
Oh, 100%, especially when they're like, "Oh, your time is coming up. You're getting older, this and this." Especially with a surrogate who's, "Hey, I wanna work with you, but I might have potentially another family," and you're like, "I gotta get there faster," right? So you buy it because you're thinking it's faster. Well, I watched a graph the other day that a doctor put up, and he was saying, "Well, actually, when you start putting the embryos out there, it doesn't because for example, like if you do a fresh transfer, you go right to it, right? Which with PGTA, you have to freeze them and then test them. So you already push out that time, right? And then depending on your results, if the fresh transfer doesn't take, then you move to embryo 2, let's say, and you transfer that embryo. But if PGTA, let's say, said all your embryos were abnormal or had an abnormal result, then you lose that chance and you're back to retrieval, right? So the problem is they have to properly validate it, they have to make sure it's doing what it's supposed to do. And that's where the issue's been. And the research that they've pointed to, they've only done a couple of research projects, don't specifically speak to those platforms. And that research even says this research should only be applied to the platform that we research, not to all these platforms that are out there. But yet they've all utilized it as saying, hey, our platform is just as good or better than this platform. And I think ASRM came out this summer and said a lot that was very important information for patients. But I think some patients didn't realize it and they still are seeing all this marketing, right? They're getting these videos, they're getting the brochures, they're going to the websites telling them all these great things. And they didn't see that ASRM said, look, there's no research that shows that this test the benefit to everybody. And they even mentioned the thing I was just talking about, which, about these things that they haven't been properly researched about, lowering your chance of miscarriage and shortening your time to pregnancy, like all these things that are being marketed for, the research
Yeah.
hasn't quite been done. And I think how many patients are going and checking ASRM's committee opinions? I am because I'm totally nerdy and love to do it, but patients are not. Especially, like I said, this woman popped up on a screen and was like, this is an amazing test because X, Y, and Z. And I was like, oh my gosh, I still think I'm not going to buy it. And then she looked at me like I had like snakes coming out of my head and whatever. But yeah, because they
Yes,
sell it so strongly. And so
they
it's
do.
very hard. And so I think people just don't know that there's where do you look? What do you say? And then a lot of times people go to Facebook groups, right? And even there, it's crazy the back and forth people have, which is, oh, you shouldn't do it because XYZ. And these people are like, you should do it because
Should do
XYZ. And then
it.
they
You
all
should
fight
do
with each
it.
other. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So the whole point is I just want transparency. I want truth in advertising. Like we all want truth in advertising. I don't want we're talking about all the time with food
Exactly.
too, right? Like I don't want to pick up food if food is not food. It's not food,
Don't
right?
call it food if it's not food.
Right, exactly. And even
If anyone wants to get sciencey and nerd out on the ASRM committee opinion, I
yeah,
believe it is open access.
yeah. Oh
So
yeah.
I will list it in the show notes below.
Yeah, they've actually issued them over time. Like they keep getting, they still have said, look, there's not, they've not provided these random control studies. They've not done these non-selection studies, that kind of thing over. And even I saw just recently some more research came out saying that like PGTA matched NIPT, the results were the same and all that kind
Mhm.
of stuff. And same thing, people were like, oh my gosh, this shows PGTA is accurate. And I was like, wait a minute, make sure if you don't actually read those research, you have to be careful with the headings because yes, those were euploid embryos, but they were also tested at 11 weeks, almost the end of the first trimester. It's not uncommon that those would be a euploid result given where you are. But if it'd been
Right.
and that research out
May
there
have
also,
miscarried.
and there's a research
Then
out there where they did 1,000 mosaic embryos and followed those, and only 997 of them didn't have the result that PGTA showed. So it's where it's hard. You have to, who's reading all those research papers, right? Most patients are not. They look to the labs, they look to their clinics and stuff for this information. And so that's why we're like, look, these labs are putting this out there. They've got to be truthful about it because these patients are taking every word and they're using that to buy that test because they aren't
yes.
they're being given that information, that's why you buy it. It's same thing with anything you buy. Drugs, right? Like, they say to you, hey, this is going to fix your headache or this is going to do this, then you sign on for that. And they have to test those things to make sure that they actually help your headache or help your pain or whatever versus just being able to put those out. And so it's crazy to me that this has been in a different way. Like it's almost like they rolled PGT-A out before they validated it. And now they're trying to say, hey, we should have done this research back when. But at this point, it's being used so often and on such high levels. And so many people have already been using it. And I feel like we're in 3 different boxes, which is people are either like, I'm so glad you guys are doing these lawsuits because I wondered about this test and it's been upsetting me for quite some time, whether it did what it said it did. Because I was shocked that I had all these embryos suddenly abnormal when, I'm a healthy person or whatever. Um, and then also like they've said things like my embryos all came back abnormal and I am a carrier for this, but I want to transfer that embryo. Is it abnormal? That's been like this whole other
That's a
discussion
good
that's like way
question.
beyond all this stuff. But yeah. And then the other people who are like, look, this upsets me. Like, this has been very hard because I've discarded these embryos or because I don't know what to do and I didn't realize that this test was like this. So, yeah, it's been a lot of really tough discussions. And like you were talking about with surrogacy, especially, like those patients have been really upset because they had another added level of this added
Especially the
pressure.
way it affects the timeline.
We've covered a lot from Allison's personal story to how this test, PGT-A, is sold as a miracle add on for IVF. And while we've maxed out what we can do today, there's even more in part two. We're going deeper. You'll hear the shocking claims some testing labs are making, the lawsuits now in motion, and probably most important to you, how PGT-A affects your surrogacy journey. Like what happens if your only embryo comes back abnormal? That one result could change everything from your match to your transfer plans. So make sure you catch the second part of this conversation because it could save you time, money, and heartache.